Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday to all of you out there. Um, Gorgeous day yesterday. Going to be even nicer today. So watch this video really quick, practice some IXL, and get outside. All right, get outside. Enjoy the weather. All right, so finding common denominators. When we add fractions, which we're going to start to roll into today and going into next week, remember that we cannot add fractions if they do not have a common denominator. All right. So if I was given the problem 1/4 plus 1/4, I'm happy because we have matching denominators. And you know the rule of adding fractions that you never add the denominator. You only add across. Oh, geez, we lost you there. We add across, and we would get 2/4. Now, for sake of remembering to simplify, we can go into that really quickly. Remember, to simplify, you want to bring it down to lowest terms. What can go into both the top and the bottom? Remember, we always say try 2, 3, 4, 5. Usually those are the ones that always get you to lowest terms. In this case, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is a half. So in simplest form, you get down to 1/2. All right. And here, once again, we'd accept that answer, but at some point, in your math career, whether it be 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they're going to request lowest terms. All right. So just something to start thinking about as we go forward. All right. So that's easy. All right. Yeah. If they give you common denominators, that's simple. Okay, but what happens when they give you something that does not have common denominators? So let's just do some simple numbers again. 1/3 plus 1/4. Now, you can't just add straight across because you cannot add until you have common denominators. The reason being is 1/3 is a certain, a larger section. If you look at like 1/3 plus 1/4, these sections are different sizes, and we can't combine them until we get them onto similar terms. All right, that's the reason why denominators must match when adding. Now, when we start with this, we want to think of the multiples of both 3 and 4, and we want to find a match. Okay, any common match will work as a denominator. We'll get to that shortcut in just a second. All right, but the most common method is you take your denominators and you're going to list their multiples. Now, multiples is basically just like what we kind of call skip counting. If you remember that we talked about this during the course of the year. So skip counting is counting by that number. So 3, 6, 9. Basically, you're going through their multiplication table. Okay? So 3, 6, 9, 12. And usually if you can do, I would say 5, you're probably going to find a match. You're going to do 5 multiples, you'll find a match. So once again, reminder, 3 times 1, 3 times 2, 3 times 9. I'm sorry, 3 times 3, 3 times 4, 3 times 5. So let's do 4. So 4, 8, 12, 16. We're just going to go all the way out to 5. And you'll notice right now, right off the bat, we have a match. And that's all you're trying to find, because the word is common. And think about if you have what that word means, common. If you have something in common with a friend, you share that same interest. All right, so common denominator means that, hey, you both, 3 and 4, you both share 12. Now, if we kept going, I'm sure we would match somewhere else. An easy one to think about is if we added, we'll add 10 to each, and that would get you to, big numbers. But we want to try to find, this is what we call a special one. This is called the lowest common denominator, because down the line, they would probably match at some point. Okay? So now we have our lowest common denominator. We have a common denominator, and now we have to do the next step, which is convert. we have to make each and every one of those, there's actually only two of them in this question, 1/3 and 1/4, into a fraction with a denominator of 12. So I'm going to take this problem and rewrite it vertically. Okay, remember this is the same problem that we had earlier, right here. Okay, and I'm just going to put it vertically. Okay, so the reason we do this, and we also have this long line here, because we're going to work kind of left to right. All right, we're going to work left to right here. So what was our common denominator? It was 12. Okay, so we're gonna add those in. All right, and remember, we need those common numbers to add. So what times 4 will give me 12? Well, it's 3. All right, and whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. Okay, so 3 times 1, 3. Next question, what times 3 will give me 12? And you know that is 4. And then we do whatever do to the bottom, we do to the top, and we get 4. Now, as back in our sample here, you see we were happy when we had common denominators. We have just created equivalent fractions that now can be added to get our answer. So common, we're good to go. Remember, we only add numerators. What is 4 plus 3? 7 twelfths. Now, you might be having, so that's our final answer, okay? And I know some of you are probably saying, well, why didn't I just multiply 4 times 3 to get a common denominator? Well, we talked about this earlier in the year. If you're given 3/8 plus, I don't know, 1/4, yeah, you could just multiply these two together. You're going to get a common denominator. Are you going to get the lowest? No. The thing is if you use that shortcut where you just multiply the denominators to get a common denominator, that's a great strategy. It'll work. You might be creating more work for yourself on the back end, okay? Because if we look at this problem right here, okay, what's the common denominator? Yeah, you could go to 32 because that's what 3 times 4 is. I'm sorry, 8 times 4 is 32. But you're going to be creating some big fractions with some big numbers when it's staring you right in the face. 8 is the lowest common denominator. All right, and that leads us to our second strategy. And I think some of you will remember this. If you're, if actually one of your denominators can be divided evenly into the other, well, guess what? Then that means this is your lowest common denominator. All right, that's a shortcut that we talked about at school. So if I had 10 as a denominator and 5, well, I know my else, I know my, we're not even going to worry about the numerators. If it's 5 and 5 can go into 10 twice, well, guess what? My LCD is 10. If I had 6 and let's just say 24, well, I know 6 can go into 24, so 24 is my LCD. So there is a little bit of strategy involved when you're talking about finding a common denominator using a shortcut. Yes, you can easily just multiply the two together and you will get a common denominator, right? Because look, what if we multiply, if we go back to this question, what if we multiply 24 and 6? That'd be a really large denominator. It would work, and at the end, we would have to reduce and reduce and reduce. Some people don't want to do that. Another very, very good selling point about finding the lowest is once you find the lowest common denominator, the chances of you reducing at the end are pretty much none. So if you take the time to list out your multiples, like so, and find that lowest common denominator, chances are when you get to the end of the problem, you won't need to reduce a fraction at the end. So once again, as we say in math, we like to give you multiple ways to look at um, how to attempt a problem. Whatever makes sense for you is what you need to apply. Okay, but the traditional way here, and this is what most people learned when they were in school, was this method right here. List out their multiples of 3 and 4 because we got them from our question, and list them out. We found the lowest common denominator where they match. Boom. One of the shortcuts I showed you was, hey, you could just multiply the two denominators together. But once again, if you get to something like this, 24 and 6, that's going to be some bigger math. You're making a little bit more work for yourself. And then the last shortcut to remind you of is if that lower or what actually either of the denominators can divide evenly, okay, with no remainder into the other denominator, then you have your LCD right off the rip. All right, and once again, the more you do this, the more you will start seeing these patterns that the state and any test booklet or any worksheet uses. Is that there's only a certain amount of combinations you can use to really, teach this topic. So something for you just to remember. But you'll start to see patterns like, oh, I've seen 4 and 12 before. Oh, I've seen 8 and 16 before. Okay, so just remember to find a way that works for you and run with it. Okay, don't say that, oh, Mr. Hoover wants me to do it this way or that way. At the end of the day, the most important thing is getting the problem right. And we want you to use a strategy that you're going to have success with. That's all. All right. And that's that. All right. So I'll be linking this up to YouTube, IXL practice as well. And once again, flush at 9 a.m. and I'll see everybody then. Thanks for tuning in.